Hi, everybody. Apologies for coming on late. I think this is the first time since COVID started that we've had a technical difficulty. So my apologies. We are here today with Jen Cort, a diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice consultant working with schools and organizations. Jen works with groups to create sustainable and systemic change and to live out their missions regarding diversity and inclusion. Thank you for being here with us.
Thank you. And the technology issue was on my end, so I apologize for being your first since COVID, but I'm thrilled to be here and always glad to support conversations between parents and kids.
Fantastic. Okay, so today, in case you haven't heard, today is election day. And, in many houses, it's no matter how it goes, it's going to be fraught with emotion.
Yeah.
So I want to start with the question, if our kids are looking unsettled and anxious about today's election, as parents, what's our best response to that?
Well, I think the first thing, even before we respond to them, we need to be taking care of ourselves, which I'll unpack a little bit more. But most importantly with kids is not to assume where they're coming from. A lot of kids struggle with, as do many adults, to have their messages on the outside match their feelings. And so asking them what's going on, asking them how you're doing, what kinds of things you're thinking about, do more asking and listening than talking would be the number one thing.
So what do you mean by there's not always a match?
So a lot of us, most people, and definitely kids, struggle to have our words, our voice, our face, our body, our tone of voice, our nonverbal cues match our verbal cues and our verbal, our words as well as our thoughts. And so we're often inconsistent with each other. It's why you can look at somebody and somebody might look at you and say, "Are you upset?" And you're not upset. Maybe you're just thinking about something. It's because our expressions aren't all in sync. And for most of us, that's a learned skill. It's very easy for us to assume how other people are feeling based on the cues that we think we're getting from them instead of sitting down and asking them.
Okay, so that's why it's brilliant to start with our kids with curiosity instead of...
Always asking them. And not 1,000 questions either.
Right. But it's interesting because I often react to someone telling me, like, you look sad or you look something, because I want to be asked, are you, let me put a word to it. So that's great. That's great advice for probably everyone, not just kids.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know anyone who likes people to tell them how they feel, but most people like to be asked.
So in this scenario, as parents, we might be in a conversation where we have no answers either. Likely that's true. Yeah. And we have the feeling like our kids are looking to us for answers. So what does that conversation look like?
So it's interesting because I actually don't know that kids are always looking to us for answers. I think a lot of times they're looking to us to assure them that things will be okay, or that we're okay and they're okay. We're in this really wonderful time in parenting and for educators where we're not expected to have all the answers anymore like we were a long time ago. And so the more that we can create that opportunity for kids to learn from us and with us, the better off we are. There's nothing wrong with saying, I don't know, I'm not sure, I need to think about it. As long as we're also partnering it with, I'm going to be thinking about it, or I'm going to find out what we need to be doing. And no matter what, we're going to be okay. It's also, if you partner the election with COVID, I mean, these are just unprecedented times that we keep hearing that word on the news, but it's true. And it's not like we can even ask experts or our parents or our friends how they've handled these situations before. So it's brand new for all of us. And I think as long as we're creating that moment for kids where we're saying, this is new for me too, but I have confidence that that we can figure this out together. I just don't know what the answer is right now. There's nothing wrong with that. I think parents sometimes feel that they lose some credibility with their kids, but I have the privilege of working with thousands of kids a year, and they tell me over and over again, adults saying they don't know is not scary for them. Adults acting like they know when they don't is much scarier.
Wow. And how about, since you talk to all these kids, do they appreciate when a parent says, I don't know the answer, but why don't we do this together? Like, should we try to figure this out together?
Yeah, because one of the ways that we gain confidence in any situation is to feel like we have agency in that moment, to feel like we can contribute something to it. And the more that kids can feel like they're learning with their parents, that helps the parent-child relationship. And I don't think parents should absent themselves of their responsibility to be the adults in the room and to make sure that all the basic needs are being taken care of as best we're able to do. But when we're learning together, we can grow together. And, I find all the time when I'm doing work with schools, I'll ask kids at a previous school to help me decide what to do at the next school. And their wisdom is not often, always better than I could come up with. So the more that we're working with them, the more that creates capacity for thinking through problems and begins to remove some of the fear from, I have to have all the answers or else it's not going to work out, which is interesting because in the 2016 election, there was a lot of conversation about preparing kids for the jobs that don't yet exist, and educators and parents like, what does that mean? And one of the things we know for the jobs that kids that don't yet exist, the skills that they're going to need is to be able to approach a problem knowing that there isn't an answer yet, but that they can work with other people and they themselves can work on it to find the solution.
So this leads into another question. We as adults have never experienced an election that could potentially drag on for a while afterwards. Like this idea of uncertainty lingering is something that I haven't experienced in my life for a presidential election. Wow. So I feel overwhelmed by that uncertainty. Is it possible my kids don't feel the same way, like that they don't have anything to compare it to, so it's fine for them?
Yeah, well, it depends on the age of the kids. So we have to remember that what becomes normal happens really quickly for kids. And the fact that they've been living with uncertainty for a while. They have the experience. They've had the experience since early this year of living with a situation where there's uncertainty. We don't know what the answer is going to be. We don't know when it's going to end. So they already have those muscles built or are building. And so we can rely on those. I think a lot of kids, there are some kids who are really invested in what happens in the election and some who aren't, and we need to take our cues from them. But after the 2016 election, when I worked with lots of kids from all kinds of schools, I'm using air quotes, conservative schools and very progressive schools, what kids said over and over again was, they were fearful in the aftermath of the election because some it was for who was elected, but for a lot of them, it was because the adults were having such a hard time, or because adults were gleeful when others were in pain, or adults were apathetic when others were in pain. So I think we really rely on asking kids, how do you deal with uncertainty when you don't know what the answer, when it's going to end? How can we deal with this? And think about all the things we can be doing that can build capacity for them in that moment. It will help us too.
So, on the one hand, it's like, how do we be our authentic selves? On the other hand, how do we be the adults giving kids kind of like the security of knowing it's going to be okay?
Yeah.
Especially when, we might not be feeling that way ourselves. Yeah. So what do the kids want from us?
Well, I don't speak on behalf of other people, but I know what some of the things that kids have been saying is they need to know that adults are going to be okay. There are a lot of situations where kids are being put in positions where they're having to take care of the adults in their lives, or they're having to manage their emotions. And that's not good for anybody. And certainly for people whose kids are on remote learning, we have more visibility in each other. We don't have a break from, a lot of times something's bothering us. We go our separate ways during the day and we come back together and we're in a different position. And many of us don't have that anymore. So one thing we can really do is model self-care, which feels like a thing. Somebody said to me, it feels like an extra thing on my to-do list to do self-care. But if you and your family can come up with, and family is by anybody who loves the child, if you can come up with some things that are self-care things together, maybe take turns leading each other through that, that might be helpful. I also think it's important for adults to say, I'm having a hard time, but I have the skills to take care of myself. I just need to use those skills. So it needs to be saying you're having a hard time. It makes sense. That's normal, and it's an appropriate reaction to what's going on. But we also need kids to know that doesn't mean they need to take care of it, and it doesn't mean that hard time is going to remain the position that you're going to be in forever. So they need us to be trying different things and to see us doing it.
If our kids are devastated, with the results. Is it fair to give them a certain amount of time to just grieve, or should we be like, sometimes our inclination is like, okay, fine, that happened. Now let's move on.
Well, I think we want to be really careful not to talk kids out of their feelings. And the same with adults. Nobody really responds well when somebody's like, yeah, that happened. Let's move on. But it is important it's a tricky balance, right? Because you don't want them to sit in their feelings too long. I like to remind kids that the worst feeling you're having doesn't last that long. So if you're in it, there's some studies that even say the most sad you are is that moment will last about 90 seconds. And then you start to move out of it for most of us, assuming there isn't some, significant issue. And we might go back into it, but we'll go out of it. So if you think about it as the worst you're feeling isn't going to last that long, you're going to start to feel better. And what are some things we can do to make you feel better? You could even work with your kids to create a menu. I have a self-care plan that I love to do with families and with my students, where you think through all your senses, like what are the foods that make you feel good and grounded and comforted, and the sounds and the sights and textures, and go through all the different senses and write down everything that in those categories. Circle the ones that you have immediate access to, and then that gives you a list of things you can do. But I also like to give ourselves some time, like, okay, we're just going to feel as bad as we're going to feel for an hour. We're going to say all the things we need to say. We're going to do all the things we need to do. We're going to eat whatever ice cream we need to eat, or whatever it is. We're going to feel as bad as we need to feel for an hour. And then we're going to work together to feel better a little bit at a time. And we're going to build on that. So we also don't want kids to feel, I can get the sense from us, I can feel really badly, but then I have to be good, because that's too big of a leap to make. And it can cause them to internalize their feelings and not tell us, which adds to the piece I was talking about how difficult it is to read them.
That's great. That's really great. So it's in increments. It's not you're not either this or that.
Right.
So, someone's going to win. We don't know when, but someone's going to win, which means that there's a sense of victory for some people. Some kids are very invested in this election, even middle schoolers and high schoolers. And there's been so much discussion about the lack of civility. Should we be having some conversation with our kids about kind of how to be gracious winners? What does that look like the next day in school? And, what does being humble in the victory look like?
Well, and I think if I could partner that with also, how are we gracious when we lose, which I think kids, that's such an important skill to have, is to be able to lose well and be able to win well. I would distance it a little bit from the election and go more toward, I always like to think about what's closest to the motivator for the child. So thinking about, when you've been in situations where you've won and you really just want to shout it out, does that work for you? Do you think that works for everyone? How do you thinking of sports? How do you think the other team might feel? Is there some way that you could temper that a little bit? Also, the same with losing. If we don't get what we want, then how do we handle that so that we can still be in space with each other? We know no matter what, this country needs reparative work. We have to be working together. We're going to have to listen for learning. We're going to have to be able to talk across differences. We're going to need to be able to listen through differences with each other. And so the way we handle winning and losing, our candidates winning or losing is part of how we're going to build that skill. I also think kids often don't know, they're thinking about the president and as if it's all good or all bad based on who's in the White House. And there are a lot of things that go into that are certainly true. But there's also thousands of people between a student and the White House that represent them in various places in their local communities and on a state level, in a district level, all through from them to the White House. There are thousands of people. And I really think it's important for kids to see themselves connected to being change agents. And one really important part of that is being able to talk across differences and listen for learning. I mean, those are two skills that we all need. I mean, certainly you watch the news and it's something I wish everybody had. And if you have a house with multiple children in it, most houses with multiple children have opportunities to talk across differences and listen for learning. It's right there. So building that skill, focusing on that skill at home where it's closer to you might help to translate a bit. toward the aftermath of the election.
In response, one is if that kid is very they're very energized, like you see something erupting in them. How do you steer them toward kind of what we're calling activism today, but just involvement in politics, whether it's on a local level or, what's the best advice a parent could give to their teen?
Well, one of the things we know that we need, and we've heard it a lot in this election, in the 2018 election, is that younger people being involved was really what shifted the results of the election. So we need kids to see themselves in the process of change. There are a lot of great ways that kids can be involved in local organizations and even national organizations from their own home. My daughter, who's now 16, when she was 11, she started a branch of Not in Our Town, for only Brookville, Sandy Spring, where we live, which was focused on anti-racism and anti-bullying. And she did it just by signing up on the website and starting a chapter and talking to a few people. So as much as we can do around that, also if there are clubs at their school or anything, any of those opportunities for volunteering and for activism at school, which many schools are doing more and more of. But we also see many more community-based activities. I think a lot of kids were feeling for a long time over the summer, if I'm not going to a protest and I'm not doing anything, and there's so many other pieces they can do. There's nothing more powerful than our word. And so writing letters, sending emails, calling representatives to say what's important to you. Most school districts have student representatives to the school board. So getting in touch with your student representative, and those students usually campaign at our schools. That's for public schools, for independent and private schools. There's usually a student representative to the administration or to the faculty in some way. So working with them. And if there's not, maybe you ask for one and be that person. There's also great diversity conferences for the ones that I run are for, we started in third grade, and then we have middle school and high school. So there's a lot of opportunities for us to be involved and to get our voice out there and to learn from each other. It's really just a matter of looking for them.
Great. Okay, my last question to you. There's been so much fracture between families and friends around this election. When it's over, do you have any words of hope? How do we repair those relationships?
Oh my gosh, that's a big one. I think we have to remember that love precedes everything. And if we listen to the words of Martin Luther King Jr., Mahatma Gandhi, and many other leaders, they talk about leading through love. And that in love, when we care about somebody, that means we have a relationship with them, and our relationship should have the capacity for disagreement. We also are in, I think, some really dangerous times where we're really labeling and unlabeling people. If you say that you are voting for one candidate, we decide all kinds of things about you as a person, which may or may not be true, but we're not asking to find out. The other piece is we know that change happens when people feel heard. Change does not happen when people feel shut down or talked to or at or over or through. So listening for areas that you agree. It could be the smallest area possible and build out from there. Also thinking about how change doesn't necessarily happen in the moment. We're often planting seeds for fields that are going to grow later. So going with that as well. COVID happening at the same time as all this election stuff reminds most of us the fragility of life and health and loss. And so the more that we can be thinking about what we want our relationships to be with people and make that happen, the better off we are. I know a lot of families who said last Thanksgiving or for the last few Thanksgivings, we're just not going to discuss politics. What I worried about them was then I didn't hear from them what they were going to discuss and what they would discuss so they could come back to being a family. I know one family who they decided we're not going to discuss politics. There's no point in doing that at Thanksgiving. This was last year when we could be together for Thanksgiving. But what we are going to discuss is our favorite holiday moments. And everyone was talking about their favorite holiday moments. And I thought that's a really nice way to bring us back to commonality. And then we can build out from there. And I think about it like, these conversations are building the framework of a basket, and that basket can hold bigger, heavier conversations. But we've got to put some work in. Certainly, politics should not be a divider in a family or friends. And so that doesn't mean we have to be with them all the time or agree with them all the time, but we definitely need to, whatever we loved in that person is probably still there and spend some time looking for it. And the last piece I'll add on that is I really worry about kids seeing adults write people off because of their viewpoint, because I think it's dangerous for kids to see that if you don't like what somebody says, you write them off as a person, because then how do you learn to disagree? Good relationships, healthy relationships can handle disagreement and differences of opinions. Doesn't mean it always ends well, but they can handle it and they can hold it. That basket can hold it.
Jen Cort, thank you. And looking to a brighter future. Thank you.